Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP, a bi-weekly conversation in which AARP staff and volunteers talk to Connecticut decision makers about the policies and programs that are of interest to older residents. My name is John Erlingheuser. I'm Director of Advocacy and Community Outreach at AARP Connecticut, and I'm very pleased to be joined by one of our great AARP volunteers, Meari Avery. Thanks for being with us today, Meari. And do you want to tell the folks what you do for AARP and a little bit about yourselves?
Sure. Hi. Thank you, John. Thank you, Senator. My name is Meari Avery. I am a lifelong resident of West Haven. I grew up here. I was in Colorado for about 12 years and returned back to West Haven, and I'm here in my childhood home. I have been volunteering with AARP for about 4 years in the advocacy and community involvement section primarily, a little bit with caregiving, but not so much. I'm a registered nurse, and I also have my master's in psych nursing and continue to teach nurses, bring them into the hospital, student nurses. So even though I'm retired, it's sort of a part-time position. And in my spare time, I like to garden, I like to read, and of course, love to take walks on our gorgeous beach. 3 miles, West Haven, great beach. And thank you.
All right. Thank you, Meari, and thanks for all you do and all the AARP volunteers for what they do. So it's also my pleasure to welcome Senator James Maroney of the 14th District. He is also the co-chair of the legislature's General Law and Regulation Review Committees. Senator Maroney, can you tell us a little bit about your background outside of the legislature and what towns you represent before we start talking about your roles on the various committees and some of the accomplishments you've made in the legislature?
Great. John, thank you very much for having me. Meari, thank you for having me here today. I am very honored to represent the towns of Milford, Orange, West Haven, and Woodbridge. I grew up in Milford. I went to the public schools in Milford. I graduated from Jonathan Law High School, and then from there I went to Yale University. I ran track and cross country in college, although now you can look at me and tell the only thing I run for is office. So I do not exercise nearly as much as I should. But after graduating, I traded stocks for a little while, and then I started a business over 20 years ago where I work with high school students, getting them ready for college. So we do SAT prep, ACT prep, and preparing students for college. And I've been a member of the Devon Rotary for a number of years, helped to start the Milford Education Foundation, and been active, I guess, in the community. In addition to representing the community, I served on the Board of Education for 1 year in Milford before I was elected as a state representative. I served for 1 term as a state representative. I was not reelected, and then after 4 years, I ran for the state senate, and I'm now completing my 2nd term in the state senate. So
awesome. So Meari, I'll toss it over to you.
So, I have a question. Your role, you're the co-chair of the General Law and Regulations Committee. What does that role entail, being co-chair, and what does the committee work on? I'm really not sure your scope of oversight there.
Great. Thanks for that question, Meari. And yes, the General Law Committee has a very wide cognizance. It has a number of issues that come under our purview. And so you do such a great job educating all of your members. So I'm sure they understand that there are different committees of cognizance who oversee various issues. Our issues are anything that's regulated by DCP, Department of Consumer Protection. And so that means it ranges from regulating the liquor, gambling regulations fall under DCP. The recreational and medical marijuana programs are under DCP, but so are career licensures. So the architects have to register or other, and some of the apprentice programs are regulated by the Department of Consumer Protection, as well as the pharmacies. They do regulation, and that's of interest. And so the different pharmacy programs are regulated by DCP as well. So it's actually a very interesting committee because it is such a wide cognizance. There are a number of different issues we get to tackle, and it's great for someone who I have a little bit of ADD, I think, and I like to learn about a number of different things. And so in this past session, we worked on things ranging from this sports gambling to working with expanding the ability of pharmacists to practice with their collaborative agreements so that they can do the renewals without, in certain circumstances, right, under the guidelines from the physician, their collaborating physician, but so they may not need to call them to get them to reauthorize refills. And one of the things they found in the pandemic was it was difficult sometimes to get in touch with the doctors. We have such a shortage, so to get those refills. And so this allows the pharmacists to practice more fully within the scope of their training. So that was one issue, as well as I worked on data privacy this last session. So we do also do some things that are DCP primarily, but also some of the things with the Attorney General's office we work with.
That's a lot of stuff that you have cognizance over, and that's some important stuff. And we're going to talk about some of the bills, particularly data privacy, in a few minutes. But, as Meari alluded to, you're co-chair of the General Law Committee, but you're also co-chair of the Regulations and Review Committee. So what is that? I mean,
yeah, and the regs review process is very interesting. I think Connecticut is somewhat unique in the way we do the process. And so when you pass the statutes, some of the statutes give rulemaking authority to the various agencies, and they have to promulgate regulations to actually put those statutes in place. And the Regulations Review Committee meets to look at the regulations and make sure that they're in line with the intent of the original statute. So it's not another chance to re-legislate. I think sometimes people have a mistaken idea that you could change something, but you're really just making sure that it's in line with the intent of the bill. And so this committee meets year round, right? The rest of the legislature are only in session technically 3 months or 5 months. Regulations Review Committee meets once a month throughout the year. And we can only, there are only certain things we can do. We can approve in whole. You can improve with technical changes, right? And so the LCO, the Legislative Commissioner's Office, and nonpartisan staff, they review they review the regulations and then make a recommendation to us, right? Whether we should approve in whole with technical changes, reject without prejudice, meaning that they can resubmit it, or you can't amend the language that's been sent to you, but you can reject certain pieces, right? So you can approve part and remove certain pieces of the legislation. So it's limited in what you can do. It is a bipartisan committee. And so the co-chairs, and you would ask, I guess, which I didn't answer previously, but what's your role as a co-chair? And so as a co-chair of a general committee, you set the agenda, right? And you get to pick which bills are called, and you work through screening. And general law is a great committee in that it really is a bipartisan committee. We involve our ranking members, even though both the co-chairs are Democrats. We work very well with the Republican ranking members, and we really make decisions together on what we're bringing forth. The Regulations Review Committee by statute is a bipartisan committee, in that there is right now my co-chair is Representative Claritas Detrius, so it's a House Republican and a Senate Democrat. So next time it'll be a House Democrat and a Senate Republican who are the co-chairs. And so we work through that. You have ranking members as well, but Representative Claritas Detrius and I work together very well on the regulations and communicating what's coming forth. And again, it's not really policy as much as you are just making sure that the regulations are in line with the original policy intent.
Awesome. So Meari, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah. So I did have one question. Is there any overlap in membership from year to year? I mean, it seems like that work is a lot. So how do people keep up with all the criteria that they need to evaluate?
Yeah, and the Regulations Review Committee,
Mm,
and there was, so I was the ranking member last session, and then
okay.
this session I was the chair. So that doesn't always, but usually
Hmm.
is that. So there are members who have been on it for a while, and so there is some consistency. Again, some of it comes down to who gets reelected, and some
Right.
of the members have chosen not to run for
Okay.
reelection. And
Okay.
again,
Well, that.
that committee, it's equal representation of both parties in
Mhm.
that versus all of the other committees. The membership is set to represent the proportionality of the
Right.
overall chambers, right? And so
Oh,
both
okay.
chambers are
Hmm.
Democratic controlled. The committees then are. There are whatever the ratio is. So if it's 2-1, then it's 2-1 on the committees. They try to maintain that throughout. But the regs review by statute is it's equal representation.
Yeah.
It is a bipartisan.
Well, that's good. That's good to know too. So besides this committee, what other committees are you involved with?
Yeah, thank you. I'm on, I hope I remember them all. I'm on,
Mm.
well, I always say 6 committees, but really I'm on 7. So I'll go through the 6 legislative committees and then I'll talk a little bit about the 7th committee. So I am the co-chair of general law and regulations review, vice chair of veterans, and then I sit on higher education, finance, and insurance are the committees. And then I also, the last year, I was on the screening committee. So that's a that's a caucus committee where all of the chairs will present the legislation to the screening committee. So,
Mhm.
so I guess technically I'm on 7 committees if you consider that, but 6 of them are official legislative committees.
And I would say, as somebody who's been advocating at the Capitol for quite a number of years, I would say that 7th screening committee is a very, very important one because, you have a lot of say over what bills get brought up, and, it's
Mm.
important to our members. So, hands full, definitely, Senator, and even with your hands full, you were able to pass some major piece of
Mhm.
legislation that's important to our members and the state of Connecticut. And frankly, from the calls I'm getting from my colleagues around the country from AARP, their legislators are hearing from your colleagues around the country about the great achievement that you had.
Mhm.
So why don't we talk about your role in championing Senate Bill 6, which was the data privacy and not concerning data privacy and online monitoring that you mentioned. And why do you think this bill is so important, particularly for older residents in Connecticut?
Yeah, no, and I think I first need to thank you for your support. I believe that Connecticut was the first state where the AARP came out in strong support of data privacy legislation, and that was really critical to getting it passed. This was, I think, my 3rd attempt at it,
Mm.
and I need to thank Senator Duff, who had originally brought this out, and he's been working on it for a number of years. Before I was working on it. He's been pushing this and has been a champion for this legislation. And so, as we know, nothing really happens. There's no one person who can push anything. It takes a team up there. And so, Senator Duff's vision and then working with him and Senator Looney's support, as well as our caucus support and the support of great advocates like AARP, Consumer Reports. But we were also able to work and get industry on board this time as well. And so, yeah, this is, I mean, it's critical. These are really critical protections. And what are we
Mm.
seeing? That during the pandemic, most of what we did moved online.
Mhm.
And so everything we're doing is leaving a digital footprint, right? And
Mm.
so our interactions through Zoom or, we take our cell phones everywhere. And so
Mhm.
people don't realize that some of the apps we use to they make things facilitate our life, but Life 360 is an app where you can track where someone is. So my son uses it to actually keep an eye on where my in-laws are, my father-in-law, and my father-in-law has dementia, and so he's fine now, but always worried what if he recovers. He walks and exercises, but an app like that you're using for these purposes to keep track of your loved ones, they actually sell that location data. So a lot of people don't realize what's happening with your data and how it's being used, and then how a lot of data is used for a lot of great things, right? And we can see that DOT purchases data. So like Google Maps and others will sell, de-identified data so that you can see the average speed that people are traveling, and they've identified pinch points. And so we know how we can try to fix problems, right? And we used data throughout the pandemic as well to identify where are the areas that you need to, improve, whether it's vaccine uptake or other issues. But data can also be used for nefarious purposes, right? And we've seen identity theft. We know an identity theft, I think on average, it costs a person over $1,000 if your identity is stolen, and that's increasing the number of people who have their identities stolen. But we're seeing that people use the data to take advantage of seniors. You can buy lists from brokers of seniors who are likely to donate to causes. And so if you're a paid solicitor, you could find people who are more likely and then call them. And I read an article about a woman who ran up tens of thousands of dollars on her credit card because people would call, and she would overly generous, right, and wouldn't say no, but they knew that she wouldn't say no. Could take advantage of that. And so what we did is we established a set of rights for Connecticut residents, which is similar to what was done in California, Colorado, Virginia, and then this year Utah also passed a bill. So and I heard Representative D'Agostino, my co-chair, described it as we established a digital Bill of Rights for Connecticut. And so what we did were we created the 5 rights: the right to see what data is being tracked about you, the right to correct that data, the right to delete that data, the right to portability. So if you want to export that data in a usable format. And then the other things that are important was the right to opt out of the tracking for advertising, and the right to opt out of the sale of your personal data. And so that was on an opt-out. We also created where there's some data that's sensitive data, like your location data, that you have to opt in for the sale of that data. We made the global privacy control mandatory. And so as of 2025, which I think people will find useful, because if you're going to thousands of websites, why should you have to opt out at every one of those thousands of websites? And we work closely with the Attorney General's office in Connecticut and Michelle Lucan, who's the head of the Data Privacy Unit. We're very fortunate that we had the first data privacy unit of any Attorney General's office in the country, and they are tremendous, and they're a tremendous help in this bill. But as she would say, why should it be hard to exercise your rights? If we're creating a right, it's easy exercise. And so that global opt-out will be mandatory. So it'll be the second state by legislation, but then in California it is through regulation, it's mandatory. So the third state. So hopefully that will make sure that it is adopted across the country, so that you'll go to one site and say you don't want your data sold, and then that signal will go to all of the websites so that they'll know. And then the other thing we did that I think is important is that we allowed for agents to opt out of the sale of your data. And so we didn't allow for the agents to access or delete your data because we didn't want to create a new avenue for potential identity theft, right? If you were someone could say, oh, they gave me permission to access their data or correct their data. We didn't want that, but we didn't see, in the worst case, if someone was pretending to be acting on your behalf, or they forged that they had your permission, I couldn't see any harm being done for someone to opt out of the sale of your data or to opt out of tracking for advertising, because you can always opt back in, right? And so that was, we allowed for agents to opt out because some people may not know how to do it on their own. And, again, that was something where we went back and forth on, but I think it was important to allow for people, especially I think for some senior citizens may want to have help in the opting out of their, the tracking and the sale of their personal data. So, what was important, I think there again, was that they didn't have to authenticate. I mean, they could verify, right? But we didn't set a high bar for that verification that someone was active. Because again, we didn't see the harm that would be done for opting out of the sale of your data or, the tracking, it's tracking for advertising. So that was something that I think was an important part of our bill, an important feature. And then, I've spoken with the senator from Maryland, who has been working on data privacy laws down there, and I think that they will adopt some of our language. And then Oregon, I understand, has also looked at our language and it has used that. And they have language out for a comment period. So I'm hopeful that because of the work we put in and the support we've had from both advocates and industry, that we were able to strike that balance that, provides real protections for consumers, but it's workable. Right. And so if we created something that the companies just couldn't do in the end, that wouldn't have done any good. Right. And so we did need their buy-in.
Yeah. No, and you did a great job, bringing all the stakeholders together and finding common ground so that we could get a major landmark piece of legislation passed. So we really do appreciate that. And I know it's important for our members and for the public. So we just have a few more minutes, and I just wanted to give you the ability to talk about, if you're so honored to be back again next year, what would be some of your priorities for 2023?
Yeah, thanks, John. And that's the key, right? If I'm honored enough to be able to continue representing our community and working for the state. So I try not to get too far ahead of myself, but also I think that good legislation takes time and research. So I am trying to balance it too, making sure I go back with doing the research. So a few things that I'm looking at this past session, I was able to work with Senator Fonfair to get a trial passed on a pay it forward success program. And it's just a way of getting people into middle skills jobs. So jobs that take less than a year's worth of training. So we started with the CDL licenses because, I think a lot of people have been hearing we need more truck drivers and CDL licenses. I would like to see that expanded. So I want to see, there are some entry-level healthcare positions. We know we need more. So I would like us to expand that to medical assistants and some of the other beginning stage. And then with a pay it forward success, the state puts up the money, and then the employee will pay it back once they get a job, making a certain salary as a percentage of their income, capped, at a certain percentage for a certain number of years. But you also wrap supports around, because a lot of times when adults are going back, they don't have access to a guidance counselor, right? They're not in high school anymore. So and life gets in the way. You may, you may need to pay your rent. So how are you going to stop and go for new training, even though you'll be making a higher, I know I'm talking too much because my mouth is getting dry. So I'll do my best to wrap this up. I got the signal sent from, life gets in the way, right? You have to pay rent. So you can't just stop and go for training, or you have kids, and who's going to watch your kids while you go? And so with these pay it forward success programs, you wrap other supports around that, where you may be giving people a stipend to pay for their rent while they're going. And that's typically paid for by philanthropy that you bring into the program or corporate donations. And that's not paid back, right? The tuition would be paid back, but the other supports like the counseling, stipends for rent and childcare would not be paid back. So I think that's important to expand that. I'm looking at, again, working with Senator Fonfara, who had the idea for an early childhood trust fund to expand access to high quality early childhood education and childcare. Bringing together some stakeholders to do some research on that. And then, data privacy is, we keep innovating, right? And there's going to be new ways of tracking data. And so we need to continue looking at that. We have the working group that is going to continue doing some work. But one interesting thing I do want to look at, well, I find it interesting, but is algorithmic decision making. And so more and more with the artificial intelligence, computers are relied on to make initial decisions and initial sorts, whether it's for your job, your insurance, other loans, right? And a lot of it is based off of machine learning. Right? So the machines and the computers are scouring information out there to learn and then using that and making the decisions. And what they're finding is, since there are biases built into what we're already doing, whether conscious or conscious, if machine learning is just going to perpetuate those biases. So we want to make sure ways that we can prevent the machines from perpetuating those biases. And so that's something that I'll look at, as well as some other issues around data privacy.
You and with all the committees you're on, and probably will be on again, you'll have your hands full. So I'm going to just toss the last question to Meari, if we can briefly wrap up from there, and we'll close it out.
Okay, so my last question is, AARP volunteers, we frequently go and we testify. How can people stay informed? What would you suggest? How can we stay informed and educated, both while you're in session and while you're not in session?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know AARP does a great job of training people to come up and testify, and that you're visible when you're up there. I think one of the good things of the pandemic is I think that we've increased access to testifying. I'm hoping that we keep Zoom as an option so that people don't have to give up a whole day to go up to Hartford, right? That they can testify from their home. And so, again, we haven't set the rules yet. That's something that when the new session starts, but I would definitely push to allow, I want us to be in person, but I think we should allow people, as long as they're in Connecticut, you can geofence, but Connecticut residents or people in Connecticut to still testify by Zoom. I would say most of us legislators have email newsletters, so to sign up for the email newsletters. And I was at a college information session once, and the admissions officer gave this advice to students. He said to find out who's going to be reading your application and create a connection with that person. And so his example was this woman, a young lady who came to one of their college fairs, and she was talking with him and talking about what she was going to write her essay about. He said when her essay came before him, he's like, oh, I remember her, and I remember liking her, right? So create that connection. I would say it's similar for legislation. Try to create a connection in some way with your legislator, right? And so that could be to go to their coffee hours. Most of us host coffee hours, or to go to a town hall or an evening, introduce yourself. And that way, when you email them with your input, they're going to say, oh yeah, I remember talking to that person. More likely, again, we try to open everything and respond. Sometimes we get overwhelmed and probably, at least speaking for myself, not always as good at it as I would like to be. But if you can create that connection, you're going to get a quicker response, and they're going to say, oh yeah, I remember them. I know what they do, right? I know they're really involved and on top of things. And so I need to listen to their input. So. Well,
Representative, excuse me, I gave you a demotion there. Senator Maroney.
Not a demotion, we're the same.
Listen, we really do appreciate you doing this with us today. And you've always been very accessible and worked hard for the residents of Connecticut, in particular our members, even when you were in the House and since you've been in the Senate. And we really appreciate that work that you've done for us. And Senate Bill 6, the data privacy bill, landmark legislation for us. And we're so pleased to be able to work with you on that. Is there anything else you'd like to say to any of them folks as we close out here?
No, just thank you very much for what you do, to keep on doing that, to reach out, to advocate. It's always, as they say, the boots on the ground that provide the best information. And we know how critical the caregiving workforce is going to be going forward, and that we're going to have a lot of needs, right? We have an aging population in Connecticut, and we need to make sure that Connecticut's not just a great place to live, work, and play. It's also a great place to retire, and so that we can keep as many residents here as we can.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Meari Avery. Sure.
Can I add one thing? I
Yes,
just
very
want to
quickly.
thank Senator Maroney. I do get your newsletter, and I find it incredibly informative and helpful. So I hope other people do sign up, because you really let us know what's going on in our district, and I appreciate it.
So, thank you very much.
Well, thanks to Meari Avery, one of our great AARP volunteers in Connecticut, and to our honored guest today, State Senator James Maroney. And we'd like to thank everybody for joining us this morning for another edition of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut.